If you remember last week, we were speaking about wisdom. We talked about original sin. We talked about the idea that our wisdom comes from the Lord. It must come from the Lord. And I asked you to think about the people you listen to. Who are the voices that you listen to? How do you weigh up when you hear someone speak, whether you take their words seriously or whether you perhaps reserve them in a sense and think, well, hang on, there may be other factors. The reason I've got the microphone is just so you can be heard by anybody on the live stream if you've got a comment to say. And I'd like to invite you, if you've thought that over, how do you determine the voices and the messages that you listen to?
Sometimes with a preconceived idea of the person doing the talking.
I see. So you've had some experience of that person and you know
Yes.
whether what they say is trustworthy or not.
Yes.
Yes, fair enough. Any other thoughts on how you make that determination? What are you looking for in the things that you listen to and pay particular attention to?
Yeah, add to the same. I mean, the ulterior motives, you have to think, do they have any ulterior motive or any conflict of interest? Are they trying to mislead you or something like that? Or at best, perhaps they are themselves confused. Do they look coherent enough and do they look benevolent enough?
Yes, no, that's fine. That's fair enough. Thank you. Anybody else, any other thoughts they'd like to add?
The colour of their voice.
The colour of their voice, their tone of voice, the way that they express
yes.
themselves.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
You can guess it.
Yes, okay. So we're reading something about character, aren't we, in the way that a person expresses themselves. No, that's fine. Does anybody else want to add anything in particular before I move on? No, that's fine. That's fine. Thank you. Now, as I say, we're thinking about how do I get it right? When I approach the word, understanding that there are ways that I can misinterpret and misunderstand the word, how do I get it right? And I wanted to share with you a couple of passages from the teachings of the church and reflect on those, and then I'm going to come back to the Malachi passage. So I'm starting with this one. So from Heavenly Secrets, we have this statement: none can see whether the doctrine of their church is true except those who are in the affection of truth for the sake of the uses of life. They who have this end are continually enlightened by the Lord. Now, one of the things I notice about this passage is it's not a denominational thing. So Swedenborg's not saying, you have to belong to this church or this group to understand the truth. You see? This could apply to anybody in any religious or church organisation. That it's those who have an affection for truth for the sake of the uses of life are able to determine whether what they hear said within the context of their church, those people are able to distinguish whether it's true or not. It's an interesting passage in many ways, but it's not denomination. So you can't belong to the right church. I think that's a very key point. You can't belong to the right church. Now, I want to just also to particularly point out the affection of truth for the sake of the uses of life. Hang on to that one, because something very similar appears in these passages. When doctrine is being collected from the Word, man must be in enlightenment, which he receives when he is in the love of truth for the sake of truth. Now just dwell on that for a minute. The love of truth for the sake of truth. You must want the truth for its own sake, not for any other reason. So it's not for any benefit that you might derive from it. It's not that it props up your particular opinions or it props up your particular desires, but you have a desire for the truth, such that were you confronted with something that you find personally challenging, it would stimulate you to change. And that is a fundamental aspect of this search for truth. Now then, notice the second passage, in proportion as a man shuns evils as sins, he loves truth. So there's something about the examination of self in here. So we're looking within ourselves all the time for the things that stand in the way of truth. So motivation matters. Your motivation for looking for truth is important. And we've kind of reflected on that in what we've said today. Now I want to reflect on this last one. I'm sorry it's quite long, but I think it's well worth reading all of this. So this comes from Divine Providence. It is apparent that someone who awaits influx is no different from a statue. For inevitably he must stand or sit motionless, his hands hanging down, his eyes either closed or open without blinking, not thinking or breathing. How much life does he have then? And then it goes on. It is also apparent that someone who believes that everything he thinks and does originates from himself is no different from an animal, for he thinks only with his natural mind, which the human being has in common with animals, and not with his rational, spiritual mind, which is the truly human mind. Now, what I wanted to just point out about this passage and why I wanted to dwell on it is there's a balance which must be struck here. There's an acknowledgement that all goodness and truth comes from the Lord. This is this idea of influx. But countering that in a way and balancing it is this idea that we have some participation in the process. So we can't just rely on the Lord to sort of rain down truth and understanding on us. We actually need to engage in it. We need to engage in the process. On the other hand, we can't think that truth and goodness comes entirely from within our own being, because that in itself just leads us nowhere. And it's like having an anchor of truth. So we have a certainty, and we have an anchor which holds us in place. But if you think about a ship at sea in a storm, it's rooted to the anchor with something that is flexible and something that can move as well, because a ship in a storm, were it to stay absolutely still, would be in great danger, because of course it can't resist the storm. It would kind of snap. And you come across this balance of two things, of two powers quite often. I've got a book by Jordan Peterson. It's his 12 Rules of Life. And he talks about walking the line between order and chaos. So order is that thing that is firm and fixed, and we know and we can predict what it says. Chaos is that creative spirit which allows a little bit of flexibility and movement. And this is what he suggests is the path that few people take on the road to heaven, is this walking the line between order and chaos. It's an interesting idea. And in Jesus' teachings in the Gospels, he says, "Seek ye first the kingdom of God, and then all of these things will be added to you." And one of the things we must do in our search for truth to get the Bible right is to continue to seek. So we have this sense that the Word contains truth within it, but were we to stop looking we would no longer have access to it. Now this is where I then feed back to Swedenborg talking about, you can't join the right church, because what tends to happen in many denominations is that they kind of put out this monolithic doctrine which you must subscribe to fully in order to be saved in their view. But it's not quite like that. We need that, yes, sense of firmness and sense of reality and objectivity, but we also need that part which processes and thinks and explores and looks for the truth and tries to seek something deeper within it. And I think of that as the teachable spirit, which is often referred to in other parts of the word as well. When we stop being teachable, we lose our access to the truth. Now I want to come back to Malachi. There's two particular verses I'm just going to reflect on. So verse 8, will a man rob God? Yet you have robbed me. But you say, in what way have we robbed you? And the answer is, in tithes and offerings. Now the second question is fair enough. In what way have you robbed God? How can you rob God? We're talking about, the infinite, the all-powerful, the creator of the world. His is everything. How can you rob God? Now, the answer that's given here is in tithes and offerings. It's not that those things don't belong to God already. It's just that we've stopped offering them. Now, in the Word, when we're talking spiritually, the idea of theft is where we take for ourselves something that belongs to someone else. That's what theft is. And in the case of God, it is to attribute the source of wisdom. So if I believe that I am my own source of wisdom, if I believe that my mind has it right, and if I have no other source of truth outside of my own thinking, I am robbing God. That's what I'm doing. Now, the tithes and offerings. You see, that's what the tithe did. That's what it represented to the people in their religious observance. Offering a tithe, a tenth of their income, was a way of acknowledging the fact that their whole existence, everything good and truth within them is from the Lord. They're returning that to Him as an acknowledgement that He is the source of it. Now it's interesting that the tithes and offerings ties back to what Swedenborg calls the remnants or the remains. And there's reference in this passage to those people who are kind of saved by the Lord. That remnant, that thing that then gives us assurance of salvation, which comes from the Lord, is in the same way represented by these tithes and offerings. So you have this promise. Bring all the tithes into the storehouse, that there may be food in my house, and try me now in this, says the Lord of hosts, if I will not open for you the windows of heaven and pour out for you such blessing that there will not be room enough to receive it. You see, when we're able to acknowledge the Lord as the source of everything good and true, so that includes our perspectives on the Word and the world around us and the people that we see. If we're able to do that, if we're able to remain flexible enough so that we can hold our opinion but still we are open to a source of truth beyond us, then we have access to insight and truth and blessing in a way that we don't have if we just hold on to our own narrow little way of viewing the world and viewing other people. And this is what I think is being said here. So we need to spend our time, and especially as we read the Word, but also as we interact with other people. You know, we need the sense of certainty of, you know, I have a standard or something that I subscribe to, but we need that little bit of flexibility too that says, well, hang on, I might be wrong. I might be mistaken. There might be another aspect to this that I can't see in the moment now. So this, as I say, the order and chaos of having that anchor, but then the flexibility to be able to move with the storm is a very important point of the way that we get the Word right. At the end of the day, you know, the Bible is such an immense book and it has so many depths to it. It's unreasonable for us to expect ourselves to understand everything within its pages just in an instant. And, you know, we read it, we could spend a lifetime and longer reading the Word and discovering more new things, new insights. And I think that's such an important attitude to have as we read the Word together.